From Chicago's CAN TV, this is Chicago Newsroom.
Well, hi there and welcome to Chicago Newsroom here on CAN TV. I'm Ken Davis. We have a show for you today, but we're also learning, we're taping our show on February 15th at about 10:30, 10:45 in the morning. And virtually as we are beginning taping, the President of the United States is speaking to the country about that horrific shooting in Florida. And of course, we have no idea what he's saying, or because we'll watch it later on. And so when you've seen this, you'll already know what he said. But I'm fantasizing that maybe he's going to say, I'm really moved by this horrific thing, and I'm realizing that I'm complicit in this along with all of my friends who take a lot of money from the gun lobby. And I've decided that we're going to make a big pivot because, I'm a leader and I'm a big thinker, that I have a good brain. And we're just going to go after assault weapons and ban them. And we'll see. Maybe he'll make that speech today. Wouldn't that be nice? But on our show today, just about the most important thing a political leader can do is prepare and present a budget. It isn't even that the budget proposal tells us that much about what's going to happen in the coming year. It's just that it gives the public the best picture we're going to get of how this mayor or governor or president sees their job. What are their core priorities? What needs to be changed? What needs to be vigorously defended? And because these people are politicians, that last budget before the re-election campaign, that's the one you got to watch, because that's the one that's sprinkled with fairy dust. Lots of new programs and initiatives, absolutely no new taxes, no cuts in services. And that's kind of why Governor Rauner's budget speech yesterday was so curious. He's still calling for big tax cuts and reductions in state employee benefits, teacher pensions, curtailment of a broad range of social services, and he says he wants to rescind last year's income tax increase, although of course he's already planned to spend all of it this year. So what do we make of this? Well, in my opinion, the single best place source to turn to help us understand what Governor Rauner proposed yesterday is the person who has to accumulate all the funds and disperse those funds to all that huge range of creditors out there that we owe money to, small consulting firms, big infrastructure consortiums. And so to help us sort this out, as they say, ladies and gentlemen, it is my high honor and distinct privilege to introduce the Comptroller of the state of Illinois, our special guest today, Susana Mendoza. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
I am so happy to have you here, and it's so timely to have you here. But as I just mentioned, there's this kind of pall that's overhanging everything today, even here in Chicago, because of the Commander Paul Bauer shooting.
So horrible.
And it would be wrong for us to go into this conversation without acknowledging that a very good man was taken from us.
Yeah, he really epitomized the best of what is CPD and just law enforcement in general. He was beloved by obviously not just his family, who he was, you lose focus, I think, sometimes when you're just talking about the officer and the law enforcement side, that he was a father and a husband, first and foremost, and a wonderful one at that. And then his family, which is a CPD family, what they're going through, they're mourning. I mean, it's been a long time since a Chicago police officer was shot, and the way in which it happened was just so horrific that, it's going to be a big loss for the city, for his family, and one that is very difficult to recover from, honestly.
Yeah. I did not know him, had not met him, but he was a clear-voiced advocate for a lot of reform, including stricter penalties and this kind of thing. And we discuss those things at this table all the time. And it's a very complicated story, because it really is a two-edged sword as you begin to increase penalties, or as you refuse to reduce bails, for example, then you're hurting a lot of people that really don't need to be hurt, and it's just a very tough issue to unpack.
It is. Unfortunately, though, the individual who killed Commander Bauer is not one of those people.
Not one of those. Absolutely right.
He should have never probably been out of jail. Right. He just recently finished his parole for gun offenses, and now we're going to be mourning a person that we shouldn't have to be mourning right now. And so it's very sad. It's painful, frankly, and I don't know. And then on top of that, yesterday on that same day, the Florida shooting with these children who are no longer with us. And I was actually in the car on the way here and did hear the president's speech. And so
you're ahead of me.
You're going to be sorry to hear that he did not say those things. No,
I didn't. I wasn't actually expecting it, as you might imagine.
And but this is what happens with gun violence, and we lost a real hero yesterday. You know, he didn't have to engage. I mean, if you think about it, he's a commander. He didn't think about his rank. He just thought about doing what he's been trained to do and what he's trained so many other officers to do, which is to engage and try to make things safe for all the other people that were at that Thompson Center, which is where we work.
Where
frankly.
you work,
yeah.
I know, and I mean, all of us, who hasn't been in that plaza, who hasn't seen that stairway, it's frightening to know what we're up against here. Okay, but let's get down to work, shall we?
Sure.
It was yesterday that the budget speech was made by our governor. And as I said earlier, there are a lot of things about it that are very difficult to sort of understand because they seem to be so contradictory. But John Cullerton, his immediate reaction to it was that the budget is not balanced. It's out of balance by about $1.5 billion. Do you consider the budget to be balanced?
I'd say it's at least by $1.5 billion. I believe it's far more than that. It's clearly not balanced, so let's just start with that. I mean, for the governor to even pretend that this budget is balanced is, again, just, honestly, I don't know how to say this nicely, but it's like living in a fantasy land. It may be balanced in his head, but that's the only place on earth. And again, at the end of the day, you have to understand that you cannot balance budgets with just wishful thinking, with, pixie dust or magic beans. You actually have to crunch the numbers. Yeah, right. You have to do the math. And we've made that math available to the governor. He doesn't even have the excuse that he had a year or two or three, or any governor has had for the last forever, that they didn't have actual numbers or current data to work with. Now as a result of our Debt Transparency Act, which we'll probably get into later today, the reality of it is these numbers were available to him even a month ago, plus even the most recent report that came out yesterday, we made available to him the day before we made it public, so the day before his speech. In essence, he ignored all of the numbers that, as the state's chief fiscal officer, I felt needed to be addressed in his budget. For example, how he intended to account for the $1 billion in late payment interest penalties that have already been, racked up by his administration, the $2.3 billion in deficit spending. He called it $1 billion. I mean, there's a big difference between $1 billion and 2.3. The fact that we still have an almost $9 billion bill backlog. He just mentioned we'd like to, over time, pay down the bill backlog, but gave no plan on how to do that. As you mentioned, he still plans to use every dollar of the tax increase that he vetoed.
And wants to.
And then what? Yeah, I mean, his stuff doesn't make any sense. And ultimately, you can't tell the taxpayers that you're going to reduce their tax load without being willing to say where you would cut to make up for the difference in the lost revenue.
Right.
He's already tried that. It blew a $5 billion hole in our budget when that tax expired, yet the governor continued to spend as if that tax revenue was still coming in, and then just blames everybody else for the state's fiscal problems when in fact they're his fault.
The thing that impresses me the most, that's not the right term to use, is the fact that he is so hell-bent on shifting state responsibilities off to the municipalities, and particularly the teacher pensions. I suppose you can question whether or not they ever should have become state responsibilities in the first place, but they are. And if you suddenly tell every school district in this state that they have to start picking up their pension, this year is what he wants to do, just like that. Yep. That's about $1 billion he's offsetting onto little tiny towns and school districts that just can't possibly do it.
Right. I guess the even more important aspect of that, so people understand what this means to them, right? Because we can talk about these big, huge numbers, but at the end of the day, this immediate action that the governor would like to take will result in immediate, tremendous hikes in people's property taxes.
Right.
So think of the irony here, right? All of last year, he was campaigning as the people's property tax champion.
Governor Freeze.
That's right. Yet right now, even though none of his members, by the way, voted to cut property taxes, and there have been, I think, at least 7 votes that have been taken in the legislature, and he acknowledged that, and actually his opponent, Representative Jeannie Ives, acknowledged that none of the Republicans voted for that tax decrease for the freeze because
yeah.
Governor Rauner didn't want them to,
Right.
So they all stayed loyal to him until they realized that it's not a good idea to stay loyal to him. But at the end of the day, he's campaigned, he's gone to people's homes and held press conferences saying how the Democrats and that Mike Madigan want to raise your property taxes. Yet he is single-handedly taking an action that's going to skyrocket people's property taxes. But he didn't talk about that in his speech, right?
Well, it's one of those things that I just find incomprehensible because there is, like I said, there's been an argument going on for years about whether the state should have picked up the pension payments. But the fact of the matter is that it is a very efficient way to do it. The state can collect the money and distribute it to the schools. When you get into individual situations where you have, and we can both name suburbs around here or towns, in central Illinois, where they are just taxed to the max on their property taxes, they are not going to be able to afford this, and the teachers' unions will be able to sue them because the Constitution says that they must be paid. So it's ridiculous. The whole thing is just absolutely crazy. I'm just not understanding it.
If you think about it, though, it makes sense. I mean, the governor, all he's done is shift responsibility onto other people, right? Whether it's responsibility for his own wrongdoing, he either shifts it on someone else or just pretends that there is no wrongdoing, right? And so in this case, let's just shift this responsibility that has been a state responsibility for forever, basically, onto local municipalities that can't afford to take on that load, and definitely not at the speed that he would like for it to happen, right? 25% every 4 years. That's way more aggressive than any proposal that has existed in the past that Democrats have supported. So in any event, the governor also has to acknowledge that when I say that you can't build a budget on wishful thinking or magic beans or pixie dust, I really mean that, because this is the equivalent. That proposal actually passing is the equivalent of really engaging in lots of, sniffing of pixie dust at the end of the day, right? Because you'd have to be crazy to think that the Democrats and the Republicans are going to have enough votes to even move forward with a piece of legislation like that. Because frankly, the greatest critics of his own legislation are the Republican members of his chamber, who he would normally have to rely on as at least a base to get started on any legislation. And, just based on the reaction of what I heard, forget about my opinion, the Democrats and the Republicans were leading the charge against Governor Rauner yesterday, saying that he wants to hike people's property taxes up, dramatically. That's dead on arrival. And it's not dead on arrival even because the Democrats don't work with the governor. It's dead on arrival because his own party will never let that happen.
Because they have to get on the train and go down to their district.
Yeah,
and
it's suicidal for them, right? So the governor, again, a lot of these ideas that he put forth are ideas that have already been tried, that have already been found unconstitutional, that there's just absolutely no way that they will pass. And then he tries to pretend that that's a reasonable and responsible budget. It's anything but.
I'm hoping we'll have enough time that I want to get you talking a little bit about the president's, I will just say straight out, absolutely ridiculous infrastructure plan, which is not an infrastructure plan at all. Like this, it's just simply a way to unload something that has been a traditional federal responsibility onto the states. And the same discussion is going on about Medicare and Medicaid and all of this. That suddenly it seems like the bigger governments have discovered that there's a way to just kind of shift it down and down. And eventually it comes down to somebody trying to pay their property tax bill. And property taxes, as we all know, are probably the least effective and efficient way to pay taxes. I mean, there are maybe worse, but it's not the way you want to be running. You don't want to run your government just on property taxes. So there's this notion I had that the federal government and some of the state governments, they just want to get out of the business of doing the things that we have traditionally wanted them to do.
You're right. I mean, you just I don't know what I could add to that. You're right. That's the deal. Yesterday it was a funny moment during the governor's speech because he talked about that they were going to be, engaging in this federal transportation project and construction program. and that they're well on their way. They've been working hard with Washington to make that happen. Yet just the day before, I believe it was the day before, Representative Dave McSweeney, who's a Republican member, who's a real fiscal watchdog in the House of Representatives, and he was just brutal against Governor Rauner for his lack of action on working with Washington, never talking to Donald Trump, not even mentioning him, right? And you need to work with Washington whether you love them or hate them to bring the transportation dollars to Illinois. And so Representative McSweeney actually was in Washington and even doubled down on realizing that there's really been very little to no communication between the Rauner administration and the Washington folks to actually bring those transportation dollars here. So it was a real interesting moment in the speech when he said, oh, we've been working hard and we're ready to pull the trigger on this transportation thing. And I turned to look at Representative McSweeney just because I thought, oh, that is the biggest whopper that has maybe come out so far. And you could see him like squirming in his chair like, that is so not true. But we have a governor who just really has an inability to accept responsibility for any wrongdoing, who has the inability to frankly just tell the truth to the public. And I really almost feel like there might be something wrong with him because like you start to just repeat the same lie over and over and over. And those lies are debunked by third-party independent fact checkers time and time again. Like, of course he's never passed a balanced budget, yet he'll look the public in the eye and say, I've passed balanced budgets every time, or I've introduced balanced budgets every time. Totally not true. It's not Susana Mendoza speaking. That's like third-party fact checkers like the Better Government Association, PolitiFact, and who's the other one? The Civic Federation, right? These are all very respected organizations. And PolitiFact even called his lie a pants on fire. That's like liar, liar, pants on fire. You can't do worse than that, right?
Level.
That's like, that's it. Yeah. But he still, he spouts these things off as if they're true. And, I just hope that by now, after 4 years of hearing this, the public is just smarter and can understand that the governor just can't tell the truth. I mean, he'll lie to a cardinal to his face and then pretend he didn't. And so that's who we have, and we need a new governor.
We haven't even touched on higher education.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, the governor is saying that he's got a plan to fix the fiscal problems that are there in the higher education field, and yet more than almost any other living human being, he's created most of those problems. The massive cuts in all of public higher education in Illinois have largely come on his watch.
That's exactly right. And the cuts that came before that, he would like to say that the Democrats were the ones, and particularly he's mentioned Governor Quinn, as that the cuts to higher ed started under Governor Quinn, not on the state side. So this is an important disclaimer to make here. Yes, the cuts to higher ed did start a few years ago before Governor Rauner took office, but that happened on the federal level. So the federal stimulus went away, and Illinois actually increased its funding towards higher ed to try to make up for that gulf. It wasn't enough, right? We were still underfunding universities, but the state has always felt that it's important to invest in higher education because that's what the job creators are looking for, a skilled workforce, and Illinois is really strong on that. At least we have been. Governor Rauner has, reduced funding to higher ed by 60%. 30% in his first year alone. And then he starved the state universities over the last 2.5 years with that budget impasse. And my office, for example, who's charged with paying the state's bills, it was so stressful to think that we had almost $1 billion in a dedicated fund for higher education that I could not touch because there was no budget. In other words, I had no legal authority to pay that money, even though it was sitting there. Meanwhile, because of Governor Rauner's reticence on getting a budget done, those universities, 5 of our state universities, went into deep junk bond territory.
And it's going to take them years to crawl out of it.
And now he's talking about, well, we should just get rid of some of these universities and consolidate them. If that was your plan, then you should actually put forth a plan, not just starve them to death and then have no other option, right? There are options. We need to invest more in higher education. We need to recognize that the regional economies, places like Charleston, Illinois, Macomb, Illinois, they depend on, first of all, they benefit from having an excellent educational higher ed system in their community, but those regional economies depend on that university system as well. So we have access to education for our kids who might not want to go out of state or be able to pay for it, but you're also one of the top employers in that region, and it's it's a win. These universities produce revenue for the state of Illinois. It's not the opposite. And starving them to death is absolutely the wrong policy on any given day of the week.
Well, as someone who attended one of those, Northeastern, I have always just loved the fact that there is this kind of, I'm sorry to call it this, but sort of second tier of universities. Not all of us, our parents can send us to Northwestern. Not all of us are smart enough to go to Harvard. Maybe that's a horrible way of putting it, but in my case, not ambitious enough to have made it at a big Ivy League university. But I got a good education. I got a good, solid education that didn't cost very much because the state of Illinois provided that for me.
Sure.
And those are the very institutions that are under attack right now. And I can't stand it. It makes me very angry.
Yeah, me too. And if you go to Northeastern Illinois University, go back to your alma mater, and you'll see that there's netting up on in the hallways to make sure that you don't get hit by the debris that's falling from the ceiling, not the roof, the actual ceiling. And it's horrible. So just the deferred maintenance alone that has happened in these universities because the state hasn't paid its bills on time is horrible.
And you know, when the state now says, well, you know, we're going to be able to increase funding to higher education by this, that, and the other, I'm thinking, well, that will get eaten up in just emergency repairs to the buildings.
Right.
And we're not even talking about the education plans. Should we talk about, let's take it down to K-8, to kindergarten 8, because the governor says he's got $350 million in new money for kindergarten through 8 in the state of Illinois. But of course, he's also cutting, by some estimates, about $220 million just from CPS alone.
That's right. Well, his war with CPS and the CPS children, right, and those teachers, it's sickening. That's part of this whole pension shift too, right? So he wants to shift all the load onto the local municipalities and then take away all assistance to the Chicago school system as well. He's just wrong. I don't know any other way to put this other than the governor has waged a war on social services, on poor people, on children who are not beneficiaries of a great zip code. And our governor's office is being led without a moral compass, and it has been that way. It's been vacant of a moral compass for the last 3 years. So, you know, our higher ed system, which is who we're trying to send these kids to, lost 72,000 kids to out-of-state universities.
Is that right?
Since Governor Rauner took office.
72,000?
Yeah, 16,000 alone last year to out-of-state universities, net loss.
And this is not that we just have fewer kids
No.
entering. It's that they're just choosing not to go.
They're choosing to not go to Illinois State universities because of all the unpredictability and the instability.
Yeah.
And so those kids that we're investing money in now, you don't just invest in them in K through 8 or K through 12.
Yeah.
Illinois is a strong state and a hub for business attraction because of our institutions of higher learning and how we have so many in our concentrated state, and our educational pipeline is awesome. At least it was before Bruce Rauner. And it's one of those things with higher ed that it takes years and years and years to build up to this amazing reputation, but it only takes a couple years to dismantle the whole thing. So we've got a lot of things to fix.
And in addition to that, I mean, you know, the list goes on and on and on. The whole thing about medical insurance payments, that the governor wants to reduce that. And that's going to have a cost, not only a dollar cost, but it's going to have a health cost.
Well, he doesn't know what it's like to be denied medical coverage. He doesn't know because he's so wealthy and has never had to, you know, walk in a person's shoes that needs access to quality or emergency care like that. I had a professor from Southern Illinois University whose wife needed to get brain surgery at Washington University in Southern Illinois. That's in Missouri because, you know, the hospitals are more available there. And they denied her coverage because she was on the Illinois State Insurance Plan because her husband is a professor. He's on the state insurance plan. Now, they have dutifully paid into their premiums every single paycheck. They've done everything right, yet the state went 2 years without paying medical professionals. So they're not taking these patients anymore. And then the governor, on top of like what he should be doing is apologizing to all those state employees who weren't given brain cancer. In this case, thank God, St. Louis University took her as a charity case, at least in terms of accepting her insurance. But at the end of the day, nobody should be denied medical coverage when they've been fully paying into their insurance premiums. And our governor, instead of apologizing for that, is now doubling down and want to make it even harder for state employees to have access to good quality health care. So everything that he's doing is in the opposite direction. I joke around that, his policy decisions only make sense if it were opposite day. But in the normal world, it's been pretty catastrophic. And I would say that the Rauner wreckage has been felt by over 1 million people who have lost services or have felt completely disenfranchised from a government that is supposed to be here to help those exact folks.
Now, here's something that the governor said at the top of his speech yesterday, and I must admit I had not heard this before, and I guess this needs to go to Snopes or somebody too to be checked out. He said, make no mistake, we're in a competition and the states around us are winning. Now, he said that before. They have out-legislated us and now they're outgrowing us. And he said manufacturing jobs, many of which go to union workers, are up 110,000 in Indiana over the last 8 years, while manufacturing jobs in Illinois are up only 8,000 in that same time. In just the last year alone, private sector union jobs are up 36,000 in Wisconsin, 47,000 in Michigan, but down 9,000 in Illinois. And many factory workers in other states are now out earning our brothers and sisters in here in Illinois. First of all, I'm glad to see that he's a union sympathizer.
All of a sudden, right? Yeah.
in that statement. But I must admit that I have no way of fact-checking that, and if that's the case, that's kind of shocking.
Yeah, well, I would say that I tend to never believe numbers that are coming out of, Governor Rauner's mouth. I haven't seen one number yet that has been consistent with the truth. Having said that, if I have to believe someone without having actually looked into those numbers myself yet, I'm going to take organized labor's opinion on whether they think that right to work is something that Illinois should have or not, right? And this is what this is all about at the end of the day, right? He's trying to continue to make the case for right to work in Illinois. And he only looks at the worst things that Illinois could have. If other states are doing them, we should do those. But the best things that Illinois would want that other states are doing, he doesn't even want to pay attention to. For example,
such as,
in Wisconsin, the progressive tax, right? I mean, they have a progressive income tax. He always talks about Wisconsin, but he says progressive income tax would be devastating to Illinois. Yet the very same state that he touts as like a model in government efficiency, which it's anything but, does in fact have a progressive income tax that's working very well for them. So Illinois should have a progressive income tax. But again, the governor only takes the worst of what the other states are doing and tries to implement that here rather than look at what those things are that would actually help level the playing field for all taxpayers, not just that 1%.
And as we've pointed out many times, when Scott Walker came into office, the education pensions were all funded at 100% or more. So, he inherited a state that was actually in pretty good shape.
Much better shape,
Much better shape than Illinois ever could be. The CTU, let's talk about the CTU. They said the pension shift could cost Illinois an extra $1 billion. Does that make sense to you?
Well, it would cost the local municipalities an extra $1 billion, and that's the whole point of the shift, is that he doesn't want the state to have to pay for it. That's how he'll make up for example, the $1 billion in late payment interest penalties. Right. But it's just by getting rid of a responsibility that's his, right?
But the need is still there.
The need is still there. It's just a matter, that's why it's not an increase or a decrease. It's not a decrease to us, it's just a shift to the local municipalities. So again, it's just being so disingenuous with the public. And again, it's 4 years in a row now of him disregarding and failing to abide by his most basic constitutional obligation, which is to introduce a balanced budget approach.
Now let's go back to what you said. What you said earlier about the legislative will. I mean, the health insurance, for example. Can the governor do this budgetarily, or does it require
he would need legislative authority for all these things. All of his ideas that he espoused yesterday would need legislative approval, which is again why I said that it can't just be based on wishful thinking. When you put forth an idea, you have to believe that you can actually get it passed. Hence what we did with our Debt Transparency Act, right? At the time, lots of people told me, there's no way you're gonna be able to pass that in this toxic climate. But I was a legislator for 10 years. I never lost a bill that I introduced on the House floor because I put the sweat equity behind an idea necessary to convince my colleagues that this is important, we can do it, I need your help, can you stand with me, right? And educate them in the process. Governor Rauner is incapable of doing that. He has shown no willingness to actually extend olive branches and truthfully work behind the scenes, not in front of the cameras, right? But behind the scenes on educating the public, I mean the legislators, as to why this actually makes sense for the state of Illinois, why it will help them do their jobs better, why this will be better for their constituents, why this should not be a partisan issue. You know, he never does that. All he does is beat people up on the cameras and then expect them to work with them later. It doesn't work that way.
You have a very interesting history, and maybe this is as good a time as any to get into that, because I don't want to let you go without us reviewing this. You got into politics by becoming a state legislator, right? As legislator. And you say you were there, what, 12 years, right?
10 years.
10 years. And then you became city clerk. You ran for city clerk and won the job of city clerk. And my recollection of it, from conversations we've had around this table, is that you and the mayor didn't get along very well.
We didn't, not that first year.
Yeah, it was cats and dogs is what it was. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. The mayor decided that he was going to increase fees for stickers. I remember this very well, and you kind of just went rogue on him and started complaining about it, and pointing out that you, by the way, are you're your own elected official. You don't have to take orders from him.
That's right. I work for the people, right? And the same is true today, which is why, you know, at the end of the day, though, just to be clear, we fought it out for a good year, and I made my case as to why I was defending the public, and that was the right thing to do, and he made a mistake, right? And to his credit, I think maybe he would never acknowledge publicly, like, yeah, you know, Susana Mendoza was right on this one. But he came to that conclusion, and nonetheless, you know, we didn't have the dramatic increase on the stickers that he originally proposed, and we utilized that money at the time. You remember they were closing the libraries down. We utilized the minor increase in the fee that was across the board to keep the libraries open. So it was, you know, a negotiated thing, but he definitely, that was probably his first loss that he took to somebody who stood up to him, right? And I did, and I think rather than gain his disdain, which probably was there for a little while, he respected the fact that I won that battle and that it was the right battle to do, and it was never personal, right? It was just based on policy.
Well, you ended up co-chairing his election.
Yeah, and then so over the next 2 to 3 years, we got to know each other very well, and I really believe that the mayor has the best interest of the city at heart, and I was, you know, proud to do that. But at the end of the day, this governor is the only nut that I haven't been able to crack, right? So I've been able to work with everybody, people that I like, people that I don't like. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, it's about the end game of taking care of our taxpayers and our constituencies. But you need to believe that there's a moral compass or a desire to actually fix things. And I don't believe that the governor has that ability. Not this governor. And so that's been difficult. But going into my term as comptroller, you've seen that I've been battling it out with Governor Rauner from day one. Right. And I don't prefer to take that route. I would prefer to get along, but it's just not possible, and I have to fight for the people here.
We should just say that you were city clerk, you got reelected.
Yeah.
And then Judy Bartopinka passed away. And the governor had an opportunity to appoint somebody. He appointed Leslie Munger, and then they had a special election. You went up against her, and you beat her.
I beat her, yeah.
And
so I was elected by the people, right? And I really appreciate that so much, because every time the governor would like to say that I'm just a mouthpiece or spokesperson for someone else, I will just remind him that, you know, I was elected by 2,676,244 people.
Are you sure?
Yeah, I'm positive. And it was 852,617 more votes than he got, right? So at the end of the day, all of those people voted for me. There wasn't one person.
But who's counting?
And exactly,
who's counting?
Yeah. Well, you know what? I am, because I really appreciate every single one of those votes. And I guarantee you
your job is
they weren't
count.
Just Democrats. They were Democrats and Republicans. But even though those 2,676,244 people voted for me, they voted for me to represent all of Illinois, right? All of it. Democrats, Republicans, Green, Libertarians, you name it. No parties, and people in every single corner of the state, and I'm very, very proud of that. And I take that responsibility very seriously, right? So as comptroller, the beauty of it is yes, I'm a Democrat, but at the end of the day, the numbers tell the story, and the numbers don't care whether the people committing the fiscal lawlessness are Democrats or Republicans.
But here's the thing. I went to my copy of the Illinois Constitution, and Section 17, Controller Duties, says the controller, in accordance with law, shall maintain the state's central fiscal accounts and order payments into and out of the funds held by the treasurer, period.
That's right.
That's all it says. And you have managed to expand this job just exponentially. And I'm not quite sure how you've been able to pull that off, but you have. And the thing that I really wanted to talk to you about was I dove into, I see you have a copy of your transparency.
Yeah, here. I'll share them with you. 1 and 2.
These are fun things to read for those of us who like to go out into the weeds, because you actually got, you've mentioned this before, but I want to do it again. You got legislation passed that authorized you to order all the departments to send you reports.
That's right, once a month.
Which, let's see, I don't think, let me read this again. I don't think it says anything in here about anybody
No,
having
but
to
remember,
send
there's
you a
lots of
report
other
once a
parts
month.
of the law that require interaction between our office and the
Yeah.
other state agencies. We're essentially the state's chief, fiscal officer or accountant, if you want to look at it that way. And so, we, by law, which is in a different section than the one you read, get a report once a year as the state's chief fiscal officer, right? Once a year in October, and it's only current as of June 30th. So by the time I get it, it's already 90 days old, which means that at the 90-day mark, the state of Illinois starts to incur late payment interest penalties for paying its bills after 90 days, right? So
let's say that again, because that's really key to this.
Huge.
After a certain period of time, the
90
law,
days.
90 days, the law requires that the state pays 1%.
1% a month.
A month, right?
Yeah, and it's
so that's 12% after
12%.
a year. That's a lot of money.
Yes, there's another, depending on what category, and they could be up to 9%, another one is up to 12%. So it's between 9 and 12. The majority of the bills that we had not paid on time were at the 12%. Some of them were at the 9%, but basically you could average out to about 10.5%.
So wait, let's just say, like, I'm just like, I sold you some paper cups or something, and you owe me $1,000, and it's 90 days.
Now
That's,
add 1% to that, and at the year it's 12%, right?
so you owe me $1,120 or something, right? Instead of $1,000.
So exactly, but when you're talking about millions of dollars,
Right.
that adds up super quickly.
Well, that's why I'm trying to understand it at a granular level. So now explode this out into the $9 billion or something.
So then our bill backlog, which the bill backlog is essentially the bills that we owe people for services that they've already rendered. So it's not like future spending. It's you contracted with Department of Corrections to provide food for the inmates, right? And you send us an invoice, we just sit on the invoice forever and never pay you, right? Essentially is what was happening. And all those invoices added up together to be $16.7 billion at the height of the bill backlog. And this all happened under Governor Rauner. With the exception of $5 billion. So when he walked into the office,
all, because there was $5 billion
that's where I'm going to
when he
explain
came
this.
in.
So when he walked into office, it was a $5 billion bill backlog, which is not pretty, right? So I've been the first person to say that was not his fault, not a penny of that. But everything that happened since that $5 billion, and by the way, that $5 billion was originally $9 billion, but it had been paid down for 4 years in a row, 4 consecutive years. It went from
Quinn?
by Governor Quinn, to $5 billion. So then it was moving in the right direction, right? We were going this way. This is good with bills. Governor Rauner takes over. He inherits $5 billion, had promised to fix it. And instead of continuing that downward trajectory to 0 or close to, he took it from $5 billion to $16.7 billion in just 2 years. I mean, it was catastrophic to the state of Illinois. 8 credit downgrades later. And that $16.7 billion costs us, beyond the fact that you're putting people out of business because they're not getting paid and they can't make their payrolls, et cetera. It also costs the state of Illinois over $1 billion with a B in late payment interest penalties. It's kind of like if you don't pay your credit card on time, they're going to whack you a $35
Well, that's
fee,
why
right?
I wanted to start with a little number, because it's astounding that your first report actually discovered or revealed, I guess is a better way of putting it, that we're paying $1 billion, we don't have the billion, but we're racking up $1 billion in charges.
That will never be spent, for example, on
Higher education.
School construction,
Right,
higher ed, on job creation programs, on, infrastructure, roads or bridges, or, as I've been saying recently, a brand new Quincy Veterans Home, so we don't have 13 seniors dying, right?
And also, you also revealed this thing about $2.3 billion in unappropriated spending last year. What in the world is that?
Deficit spending, right? I think most people at home understand what deficit spending is. It means you're spending more than you have money coming in. And in this case, it's very serious because the legislature, when they craft the budget at the end of the day that the governor either signs or vetoes, and they passed it, he's vetoed it, they overrode him, now we have a budget. But this budget in and of itself sets the limit on what you can spend, right? Now, governors can spend less than what they're authorized by budget, which this governor has never done. But they're not supposed to spend more.
Yeah.
And Governor Rauner just last year alone spent $2.3 billion more than he was legally authorized to spend by the legislature. Now, the question is, does he intend to pay that back? I mean, I would say if you enter into a contract with someone, you should honor the contracts, especially if you call yourself a pro-businessman, right? So you don't enter into a contract with a businessman and then stiff them the bill. So this is kind of where we're at. How does he intend to pay for the $2.3 billion that he went ahead and entered into contracts for, where services were rendered that the state of Illinois did not actually authorize him to spend?
The thing that you don't understand, and I don't think you've ever understood, is that we need to run government more like business.
Yeah, well, that's what Governor Rauner says. Again, it's on opposite day. That makes sense. Look, government at its very core is meant to provide for those folks who are in the most vulnerable situations, right? And I truly believe that rather than just calling people vulnerable, we should look at them in the sense of everybody has a God-given right to self-fulfillment, right? To be able to be self-sustaining. And certain people, obviously folks with disabilities, people who are on their way out of this world, right, still deserve to die with dignity, and people who need assistance in their home because they can't physically do stuff for themselves. I think the general public would say, of course we should take care of those people. But those are the very people that our government has failed over the last 3 years. It's like they don't exist, and they do exist, and we have a moral responsibility. And by the way, that moral responsibility is backed by fiscal responsibility, because it's actually cheaper for us to take care of people on the front end than it is to deal with the consequences of ignoring that these folks have needs that the state could provide at much lower cost and better value.
Well, let's see if that applies to people in medicine. Does that apply to roads and construction,
of course
water
it does.
pipes?
Yeah. It's like the maintenance in your home.
Right.
You don't wait until your home falls down to fix it. You make sure that if a window gets broken, you patch the window up. And this is a common sense approach to governing. And by the way, if Governor Rauner really believed that business should be run, or government should be run like a business, then he should have supported my Debt Transparency Act that required that the state agencies report to me on a monthly basis instead of just once a year. Because can you imagine at home if you only looked at your by the way, let me use that word, looked at your checkbook once a year. Not like actually balanced it, but just even looked at it once a year. That's essentially how the state of Illinois was managing its finances until I got there. And I said, this is crazy. I can't even see where all the bills are at the state level because they don't have a legal obligation to share them with me until they submit them. And until a state agency submits its invoice to me, I don't even necessarily know that it exists. So I was kind of flying blind as a state's chief fiscal officer. And when I was a legislator, neither I nor any of my colleagues thought that the state's chief fiscal officer couldn't have full visibility of the state's liabilities.
It's pretty incredible.
I know, and I realized that once I took the job. So we've fixed that. Governor Rauner, of course, vetoed it because he loves to hide the ball from the taxpayer. And we're not letting him hide the ball anymore. And more importantly, whoever the next governor isn't going to be able to hide the ball. So if that's a Democrat, that Democrat's going to have to abide by the same fiscal transparency that I'm expecting of this governor. And if he doesn't want to do it, well, we'll go around him, which is what we did. We overrode his veto, and now we have this incredible reform that brings real transparency to the entirety of the state's finances. And we make these reports available not just to the legislators, which these are incredibly helpful when they're crafting budgets. This will be the first time in history that the legislators are actually in May, when they're crafting the budget, using numbers from April. Right? Like they used to use numbers every year from June of the prior year, almost a year old. They were out of date by the time they got them. No wonder we've never had balanced budgets. But this in fact, will help them as a really great guide on how to do their job better. And these reports are available to you as a member of the media. They're available to your taxpayers watching at home. If they go to our website, illinoiscontroller.gov, they will see this and they can dive into this, because I really believe that the people, the taxpayers, should know how their money's being spent or how it's poorly being spent.
Okay, you're a politician,
Sure.
and from all accounts, a good one. You're good
Thanks.
You're good
I'll
at
try.
it. You're a supporter of JB Pritzker.
I am.
Still,
Absolutely. I'm a strong supporter of JB Pritzker.
you're not deterred by these developments with the Blago tapes.
Well, I think, for example, to me, the one that was I felt like disappointed on was the one with Jesse White.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel it was a terrible choice of words.
Mm-hmm.
But I also feel that JB has a lifetime of advocacy and championing causes that are important to that very community, along with so many others, right? Just what he's done alone with early childhood education and preparing like Hispanic and African American kids to be able to compete with all the other children. Nobody has led on that issue, even nationally, as much as JB Pritzker has. School breakfast for kids.
Interestingly, you're doing a little bit better job selling it than he is, I would have to say.
Well, I don't know, but I'm just telling you why I still support him. And I think that what he did was, an unfortunate use of words, but it doesn't represent who he is as a person and what his entire life's product has been. And I think that should weigh more heavily on voters when they're looking at candidates than, a less than stellar moment for him, right? Here's the other point that I'd like to say about that in particular, is that unlike Governor Rauner, and I think it's important to compare the two, right? Because they're both running against each other, and it might ultimately be who is facing off. As much as you can be disappointed about what happened on that tape, JB Pritzker acknowledges that it was one of his worst moments probably, and that he takes full responsibility, and it was a sincere apology, and he's been working hard to make things better. And that is perhaps my biggest gripe against Governor Rauner, is that no matter what goes wrong in the state of Illinois, no matter what he's done to actually single-handedly make these bad things happen, he's never acknowledged any fault in anything. Like, he is unwilling, he has a chronic inability to accept responsibility for any wrongdoing or any of the damage that he's inflicted on this state. And so, as much as it's not a stellar moment, I would say it was embarrassing and painful for JB. From my perspective, it was nice to see that he actually owned up to it and that he's really sincerely apologized and is going to learn from that mistake. Because if you don't even acknowledge that you made a mistake, how can you ever learn from that and fix it moving forward? I'm the first person to say, I'm not perfect, he's not, and nobody should expect any of us to be perfect. I think we should always try to hold ourselves to a higher standard than your average taxpayers, because we're asking for their trust. But at the same time, we're not perfect. The key thing here, though, is that when you do make a mistake, are you big enough? In his case, is he man enough to own it and to try to fix and to never make that mistake again? And I think he certainly is.
You think he'd make a better governor than Biss? Or
I think
Kennedy?
I think he'd be the best governor. This is why I'm supporting him versus the other candidates. And I think they're all good men. So I would say on the Democratic side of the ticket, look at Bob Dibler. He's probably one of the best people you'll ever meet in your life, But who do I think, and I think that maybe perhaps my opinion, which I certainly don't want to oversell to your public, but if anyone has had an up-close and personal look at the devastation that Bruce Rauner has caused for our state, it's me in my capacity as the state's chief fiscal officer. I deal with it every single day. And so you better believe that I've been working very hard over the last year, and we've accomplished amazing successes in a short amount of time. I want to fix the state of Illinois, and I decided to get behind the person who I think will be ready to actually lead on day one, who will be able to build the coalitions necessary to, and that means not just Democrats, but Republicans too, right? That can actually bring people to the table where we're all acting like adults, not kids, which is kind of what we've seen in Springfield, and get the job done. He's a business guy, but he's not saying that we should run government like a business. He's not the Bruce Rauner business model. Bruce Rauner built his wealth by taking over struggling businesses and firing thousands of people. JB has created businesses in Illinois. He's the only candidate actually running for governor that has a history and a track record of actually building businesses and letting other people be self-sufficient, right, and provide for their families and so forth. So I think, he brings a lot to the table, and he's a really good person. And while it wasn't his best moment on that tape, I've seen so many really incredible, sincere, good moments from JB, and I expect to see a whole lot more when he's our governor.
when we were talking before about all the other stuff about the shifting the pensions and so forth to the schools, I wanted to mention that Mike Madigan also is an advocate for doing that. It's not just Rauner.
I know, is that at the, truthfully, I'm sorry, I just have to laugh. It's so funny to me that Rauner, who has really vilified every single thing, whether true or not, about the speaker, everything. Like if the sun doesn't come out tomorrow, it's Mike Madigan's fault, right? Like everything is bad that, you know, I don't think he would ever let his kids name anyone Mike, right? Like it's that much of a hatred. Yet he is fully embracing and actually doubling down and even expanding, like taking even further an initiative that was originally proposed by the Speaker of the House, right? Isn't that funny?
Well, but I mean, you've sat here and talked about how actually, I mean, I think you've been saying that you think it's a pretty bad idea.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's
so I assume that
I certainly think, you know, you could even argue whether or not any idea might have merit one way or the other, right? You could say sometimes an idea that today is a bad idea 10 years ago or 20 years from now might be a good idea. It depends on the climate, right? We are still $9 billion in the hole. People are feeling that they are being taxed out of their homes. This is certainly not the right time to move forward with an initiative of this magnitude, and definitely not even making it worse than whatever the proposal was that had been, you know, presented years before we were in a fiscal crisis like this, right? So I don't always agree with the Speaker of the House either, as much as the governor would like to pretend that I do. I don't. I mean, I'm my own person, and like I said, you know.
But you're. I mean, it's proper to consider you to be an ally of the Speaker.
I'm an ally of many people's, I would say. I'm an ally. My job is not to be even an ally of the Speaker's. It's really to just represent the people of the state of Illinois in my capacity as comptroller, right? And I'm also a Democrat. He's a Democrat, so I'm certainly closer to his side of thought than Bruce Rauner's. But but again.
I'm cutting you off just simply because I'm watching the clock and we're getting really tight on time. But as long as we're speaking about him, he fired Kevin Quinn. We had this whole, we have this whole scandal brewing in his office with Alania Hampton. So tell me about this. Madigan should step down, according to Chris Kennedy. JB wants a thorough investigation. Has Madigan done enough? Is he exposed? I want to know what you think about this.
Yeah, well, first of all, I think it's great that, I don't know how to pronounce your name, Elena, let's say?
I thought it was Elena, but
Miss
I'm
Hampton,
not sure.
let's say Miss Hampton.
Yes,
I think it's great that Miss Hampton came forward. I do, you know, you have to wonder, why does an investigation take 3 months, right? But I don't know. I wasn't privy to that investigation. I do know, though, that the final product of firing this guy, without question, was the right move. What I do think, though, is that this is a situation that all of us as executives have to look at and look within our own organizations and see what can we do better. Because clearly, the disconnect here was that this young lady had to go to the alderman to talk about a difficult situation because there was no other process in place to actually deal with issues of sexual harassment. And I don't think that that's unique to the Speaker's situation here. You could say that about every elected official, every political organization, and every executive at any level, both public and private. So I think all of us, if one thing that will definitely, I'm sure, come out of this scenario with the Speaker is that I would believe that it's incumbent upon him to crack down on this and to come forth with a plan on how political committees should operate in this new environment. It's not a new environment in that this hasn't happened before, but it's a new environment in that everybody's talking about it and people feel more empowered about bringing forth these allegations. And so they should have like a way to follow my allegation, right? Like if I accuse someone of doing something to me, I don't want to be like waiting in the wind for 3 or 5 or 6 months because then I feel like no one's really taking me seriously. I'd like to have there needs to be a process in place that you can follow, that you feel like your allegation is being taken seriously because it needs to be. And then number 2, like you're informed throughout this process. And I think that there was a massive lack of communication there.
That's the issue here, isn't it? Because Ms. Hampton, I mean, certainly there's no question about the fact she was a Madigan ally.
Yeah,
I mean,
no doubt.
she was wholly in this thing.
Sure.
And she felt that she had to resign because things were so uncomfortable. And she accuses Madigan of running out the clock.
Yeah.
So she believes that he's done her wrong.
Yeah, I mean,
and
clearly
that's
she
one of
does.
his closest allies.
Clearly
that is
she
saying
does.
that.
And again, I think because there
I'll
were no
ask again,
process in place.
Is he vulnerable?
I think this is he's had better days, put it that way. So I think everybody's vulnerable. I don't think it's just the speaker. I think this is just the tip of the iceberg.
Do you think he'll be able to ride this out, this one?
I do, because I think the speaker will learn from this, and he'll put measures in place to make sure that it never happens in his organization. But I also think that as a result of that, lots of other elected officials in both parties will be probably looking at how they can make their climates more conducive to people coming forward and knowing that there's a path to monitoring what's happening. So this is one of those, teachable moments that unfortunately Ms. Hampton had to be the victim in here and feels doubly victimized. But the bigger question is, what are we going to do to fix it? And
what should they do to fix it? We only have like a minute, but what should they do?
Well, they've got to put some major teeth into processes, right? Like, so in our office, we're looking at revamping even what we do have, which we do have a process in place, but can we do better? And I think that everybody's going to have to do that. It's not just at the speaker's level. It has to be all of us that take responsibility for this as well.
I'm so sorry we're out of time. I do another hour. We got so much to
thanks for having me.
And I hope you'll come back again sometime.
For sure, anytime.
It was really very very interesting to meet you, and I've wanted to have you on the show for a long time. I'm so
Thank
glad
you.
you were
Excellent.
able
We'll
to
do it again next time.
Thanks to Dave Resnick for helping produce us today, and thanks to the whole crew as usual. And very special thanks to Susana Mendoza for being here today, our controller for the state of Illinois. You've been watching Chicago Newsroom. It is a production of CAN TV, as we said. Very proud of that. And you can see this and all of our other shows by going to this address to watch it, or you can listen to us on SoundCloud or Apple iTunes, and you really should. Send this one around. Do me a favor, would you? Link this audio to your friends and say, hey, listen to this. This is a good one. Thank you. See you next week on Chicago Newsroom. I'm Ken Davis. Bye-bye.